On behalf of the School of Economics and Management of the University of Cyprus, I'm really delighted that we have tonight with us Sir Christopher Pissarides, the Nobel laureate of economics in 2010, who is going to present a very interesting topic on new technology and the future of Cyprus and Greece in the context of the European Union. Thank you very much, Sir Pissarides, for accepting our invitation for this very interesting talk. As you are all well aware, technological changes in the past few decades have changed our lives to a great extent. There are so many positive effects, so many advantages, among those increasing productivity, improvements in communication and decision-making process, and in general, these technological advancements boost economic growth. The question which is raised is the following. What happens as far as Cyprus and Greece? What have we done in Cyprus as far as technological advancements is concerned? As far as the government of Cyprus is concerned, in the past few years, we did spend more attention on this issue. And also, recently, our government promised to double the investments on innovation and developing economy. And moreover, our government placed increased attention and provided incentives to start-up companies in order to have more and more of those companies. But the question is, are we at the level that we really want to or not? Professor Pissarides is going to provide some answers to us as far as this specific issue is concerned. And according to the Global Competitiveness Index, we may not be at that level that we really want to be. So as you can see, there are so many unanswered questions. Among those, what other nations do they do? And they are much ahead of us. What is missing here in Cyprus and in Greece? And what can we do in order to improve with regards to competitiveness? We as university, what shall we do in order to improve competitiveness and assist our nation in order to boost economic growth? And since here we have several students, they need an advice from us. What advice should we give to those students in order to be ahead of everybody else and at the same time be more competitive in this rapidly changing technological and business environment? In concluding, I would like to sincerely thank the sponsors of this event, Mr. Yanos Kallis and RCB Bank, and newspaper Politis for sponsoring this event. And at this time, I would like to call on the stage the rector of the university, Professor Tassos Christophidis, for his welcoming remarks. Thank you.
Well, distinguished guests, dear colleagues, dear students, it is with great pleasure that I welcome you to the annual lecture of the Faculty of Economics and Business and Management, sorry, Andreas. The University of Cyprus is privileged to have amongst its academics respected researchers and professors whose work impacts the globe. Professor Pissarides' presence and contribution in teaching and research as a faculty member of the Department of Economics are valuable for the achievement of the department's goals and the university's in general, goals and purposes. This annual public lecture is yet another contribution of Professor Pissarides, an intervention and an opportunity to discuss with the university community and the society regarding current and future trends. And most importantly, regarding the direction Cyprus should take, aiming in long-term and sustainable growth. Tonight's topic is extremely important and of great interest. Technology applications surround our present and will affect our future. We meet, work, and communicate using new technologies. The delayed adaptation of new technologies is no doubt harmful for the economy, slowing down development, discouraging current and potential investors, and damaging the quality of civil services. It would be a lie to say that Cyprus is ready to step forward in the digital era. I will just give you a few examples. The public service insists on using fax machines. Civilians are forced to submit their information multiple times when they could be easily digitalized. After all, digitalization is directly connected to time saving and money saving for the public, of course, and for the civilians. As a last example, let us all think of the process of going through passport control at the Cyprus airports. You have to submit your passport or your ID, stand for a couple of minutes, have your picture taken, and after all, what you get is a piece of paper with your picture. And when you think you're done, you have to go and hand over this, slip of paper to a policeman. So what's the purpose of the machine? In any case, if we wish to play in the societal and economic change of the European Union and the world, what is required first is to embrace the new technology, taking into consideration all legal and societal factors. It is said that our generations will be called to write down the digital constitution. The question is, does Cyprus wish to be one of the writers or one of the readers? It is my perception that we are steps behind the adaptation of new technologies, meaning we will have difficulties in coping with the challenges ahead. Actions and determination are required for getting on board into the train of development. Well, I'm looking forward to this lecture, which I hope will be an eye-opener for the audience, but most importantly, a revelation for the state and the political and social players of Cyprus. Thank you very much.
Good evening, everybody, distinguished guests, Your Excellencies, ambassadors, and dear students. I'm really happy to be here. I've been associated with the university for 10 years now. I think this is my 10th anniversary, so it gives me great pleasure to be talking to you. The topic that I'm going to talk about today, which is mainly technology, is one that's been occupying me, believe it or not, since my PhD years. Most of my work has been about the impact of new technology on labor markets, and how the job distribution responds to technologies, and how that affects productivities. The best-known paper, I should say, that my co-author Dale Mortensen and I wrote in 1994, in fact, has the title Job Creation and Job Destruction. And in fact, what I believe about technologies is job creation and job destruction. You destroy old jobs and you create new and more productive jobs. Now, a question that many of you ask me is what does that have to do with the European Union? Well, I'm going to show you very quickly why I think that's absolutely essential, that being within the European Union, we should pay more attention to the technology and to the research we're doing, and present you with the record. And there are many, it's incredible how many illustrations you can think of Cyprus, how we get it all wrong. But my favorite one is one that the director has just stolen from me, is the airport. In every European airport that I go, and I've been to many, I can assure you, all citizens with European passport look for the machines to put their passport on, very quickly open the gate, leave. In Cyprus is the only airport where they try to avoid the machines, because you're going to go to the officer anyway. In fact, I did it yesterday when I came in. I went straight, and there was an officer there and said to me, you know, you need to get a receipt before you go there. I said to him, what difference does it make? He said, all right, then go. He said, and that's public money. You know, you spend public money to make life more difficult, both for the officers there and for us going in. And I was thinking, how do we make decisions like that in Cyprus? It means that someone in some office must have being presented with all the options, and shown what the other 27 members of the European Union, still 27 members of the European Union, are doing at their airports, and he decided, no, in Cyprus, we must do what the Americans do and the Chinese. The Americans and the Chinese do what we're doing here. In China, you get a little piece of paper as well. But incredibly, they tell you you can keep this piece of paper until your next visit. You don't have to renew it for as long as when you don't change your passport. And what the Americans doing, I don't know. I mean, anyway, let's get back to economics. Now, those are the topics I'm going to cover, and convergence is the key, I think, about the European Union, as I'm going to show you in a minute. And then from then on, I'm going to talk about productivity growth and local efficiency, which is now a big topic in Europe at the Eurogroup, and finally new technology and what we can do to accelerate it. Now, the European Union, as you know, started in 1950. The process of European integration started in 1951 with the famous Schuman Declaration that was mainly addressed to peace. It was to bring peace to Europe, and was very successful, of course, there. But very quickly, it moved on to being a European Union, and we can distinguish three big stages in the process of European integration. The first one are the free trade agreements of the early years, I would say up to 1980s, I should say late 80s. Then we have the single market. I said of the 1990s, actually, but the 1980s, it was negotiated in the 1980s, but it started in the early 90s. And then finally, 10 years later, we had the single currency. Those are the sort of stages of European integration that we have been experiencing. Now, there's no doubt that the free trade agreements have been successful. All the economies are in favor, with the exception of Donald Trump's advisors, but we don't even know if it's his advisors who recommend that or if it's he who decides that on political issues alone. The single market, I'd say, has been a tremendous success. You can tell it was a success by the fact that Margaret Thatcher was enthusiastic about the single market, and if Thatcher, a perennial Eurosceptic, it really supported the idea, it means that it was very good. The single currency, however, I don't think it's been a success. I mean, if you ask the bankers, and I did spend some time with them very recently, in fact, they say it's a success because it's still there and it's strong and it's maybe stronger than it was before. But it hasn't been a success in the sense of contributing to European integration and growth the way that it was designed to do. Now, I think part of that problem is the fact that, well, sorry, back to maybe. The fundamental problem is that we had a theory of optimal currency areas, which countries would benefit by having a common currency. And the whole of the European Union obviously didn't satisfy those criteria. In fact, to my knowledge, the only countries that really looked at that seriously were Sweden and Britain. I was on the working groups that considered them in both countries. And in both countries, despite my initial support of them, we advised that it wasn't the best time to enter because of the differences across European states. Now, given that where we are now, how are we dealing with it? Well, we're dealing with it by having a common monetary policy and diverse fiscal policies, which is not ideal, and by establishing large funds, the European Stability Mechanism, for example, to deal with crisis. But whether they'll be able to deal with a crisis or not is something that we'll have to wait and see. Now, given where we are, what if we step back and say, what is the ultimate objective of these things? Free trade agreements, single market, common currency. And the ultimate objective, other than the political one of Schuman of 1951, is the economic one that we want to see convergence in Europe. That we're too small as nations. We've been fighting each other since the Trojan Wars, basically, 3,000 years. Historians like Mocker attribute the technological development of Europe to the wars, that they've given a fantastic incentive to invent new things, whereas look how China and other big countries who didn't have wars, how sleepy they were for so many centuries, but now we don't need wars to invent new technology. So we decided it was about time we stopped wars, and we're going to bring convergence through peaceful means to the European Union. There are economies of scale. The global economy now is driven by the United States and China. Very soon India will join that because of their population size. Europe just cannot cope if countries go it alone. And then another objectives that follow on from that would be that the former planned economies of Central and Eastern Europe will catch up with the rest, and so on and so forth. So objective is the convergence is the big objective. If we don't converge, that's a failure of the European Union. Let me put it that way. Now, how do you converge? Well, you converge through growth, not through transfers. You're not going to converge by having the rich giving money to the poor. Even within country, this is not the way to find inequality. Across countries is even less of a good way of fighting inequality of nations. You're going to converge by having the poorer nations grow faster than the richer nations and catching up. It's a famous adjustment to steady states, as the economists call it. Any reasonable theory tells you that if two countries have a similar institutional structure and one is poorer than the other, then the poorer one will grow faster. It's the basic premise of the workhorse of modern economics, the solid growth, known as the solid growth model. Now, what do you see by that growth? Well, obviously, wages and living standards will grow, and it's the only way they grow. You don't make people better off by giving them free money. You have to get your economy to be more productive to raise living standards. All right, so here we are. We have this union of European nations. The objective is convergence, and we've been trying to do it through free trade, single market, single currency. But these are the kind of enabling, they're the means to the end. The ultimate end has to be productivity improvements. And that's where technology comes in. Unless we're technologically uniform across Europe, and unless we achieve what the workhorse model of economics tells you, that if you have the same technology across the European nations, then the ones that are behind will grow faster and will catch up with the rest, we're not going to do it. So let me look at productivity improvements and how can you bring about productivity improvements? Now remember that what we mean by productivity, I didn't write it here because it's part of our everyday language in economics. It's basically how much you produce each hour of work. That's what I call productivity. It's a very simple concept. You know, if you produce 100,000 euros worth of output during a year and you work, I don't know, 2,000 hours, then divide 100,000 by 2,000 and that's your productivity. What's the answer, 50? So the numbers are about right, actually. That's how much productivity is currently in Europe. Now, you achieve productivity through two ways. One of them is allocative efficiency, which is the optimal or an efficient allocation of the country's resources, and the biggest resource of the country, of course, are its workers and its capital stock. So if you put each worker, you achieve the best match between a worker and a job, the worker is more productive, and that's how you achieve a productivity improvement. Or you can do it through new technology. The allocation of workers might be good, but then if you introduce new technology, you increase the output of each hour that you work simply because you use better machinery and better technological know-how. It's not a coincidence that the United States is the technologically most advanced country in the world. It's also the most productive country in the world per hour. Okay, well, what if we fail? Well, if we fail to bring convergence in one of these two ways, then obviously the European Union will have failed. The result will be political extremism, disgruntlement with EU institutions. We are going to blame Europe for not being as well off as others. Wages will diverge across the members of the European Union because wages are driven by productivity. And given the free movement of labor that we have, the poorer countries will lose their best workers, is what happened to Greece after the 2012 crisis, which is obviously not good for the future of the country. And Europe as a whole, the European Union as a whole, will just not be able to compete with the big players in this world, US, Chinese conflicts or cooperations, or Indian and all that. So the outcome will not be good. I mean, it's the fundamental thing that should happen here. Okay, well, let's take a first look at productivities. And rather than show you 28 countries, or 27, in fact, these statistics, by the way, don't include Britain. It's my revenge against Boris Johnson. It's the 27. So what I did was that I show you country groups, countries more or less similar. I divided the European Union into 4 country groups. It's the one I call the core continental group, which is mainly Germany, France, and their neighboring small states. They're the Nordics, the 4 countries of the north. Norway, I know Norway is not in the European Union, but I've included in the statistics. Norway, Switzerland is included too, actually, here. Norway, Sweden, Finland, and Denmark. Then the 6 countries of the south, Portugal, Spain, Italy, Greece, Cyprus, Malta. The European south, actually, half of it is Italy, if you look at the population and productivity. And the other half is the other 5 countries. And I compare them. And if you look at their productivities, what happened since 2000, then this is what you get. I mean, they look more or less parallel lines, but although you should see that they are not. These are big differences, by the way. They're 17 years, but what we have, and everything is measured as a percentage of the core groups. It's measured as a percentage of Germany and the core. And what you see is that the Nordics obviously have converged with the North. They are about 6 to 7% more productive, but that's not too serious if you like, but there have been no changes since then. The Central and Eastern Europe at the bottom, the red line, is a success, you could say, because in 2000, their productivity was only 42% of German productivity, if you like, but now it's 56%. There's been a growth of 14 percentage points. But the European South has been diverging since 2000, since the introduction of the euro. From being 81% of the central group is now only 74%. That's about a 10% fall in productivity, which is obviously a very serious matter. Now, this is what is showing. There is catching up of the CEE countries, the former centrally controlled, South falling, Nordics doing very well. Thank you very much. Now, if you look at what's been driving that, it's mainly Italy. I mean, there's no doubt that Italy is the big problem of Europe in terms of productivity. Productivity has been stagnant for many, many years. I'm not going to focus on Italy because of where we are, but it wouldn't surprise me if I end up giving a similar talk in Italy. And in fact, I did give a similar talk in Italy, and I talk more about Italy. If you see what happened, though, since 2007, when we reached our peak, then you will see that, with the exception of Spain, none of the other countries of the South have caught up yet in the 10 years that followed. And that's partly a big part of the regression that the European South is showing. So what happened during the financial crisis and the debt that followed is still having an impact, especially on Greece, as you can see, and Cyprus. We're still 9% here below, in terms of productivity, below where we were in 2007, and 17% in Greece. Now, of course, if you talk in Brussels about this, they immediately tell you, well, what about Spain? Of course, you can see that Spain is the kind of the shop window of the South currently. I mean, they did do some reforms in 2010-11, which are having an impact now, I have to say. I mean, it is a good performance to be 5% above. Okay, so what's the current of affairs? What can we do? Well, the Chinese are obviously very fond of saying what we are doing here is growth with Chinese characteristics, what we have to do in Europe is to get an agenda for growth with European characteristics. Now, what are the European characteristics? Not what they're very different from the Chinese characteristics. The European characteristics are that we value our welfare states, our environment, equality, privacy through the GDPR, and many others. Now, these inevitably will slow the growth in GDP. I'm not too bothered by that. You know, we pay too much attention on GDP growth. The other things, especially the environment, that is attracting more and more attention now, and our welfare states, our health systems. We do have to pay attention to those things in Europe, which means that we can never match the United States in its growth rates, because the Americans just go for growth in GDP and nothing else, or even the Chinese, in fact. But you know, we have to be aware of that and not compare against them. I say that many, many times to the Americans. They say, oh, yes, it's because Europe, your welfare states are holding you back. And I said, no, they're not holding us back. In fact, they're pushing the quality of life in Europe forward much more than what you have. And that's what we have to understand. Now, how do we achieve all those? Well, through better allocation of resources, as I mentioned, and better technologies. So let's look first at allocative efficiency. Now, allocative efficiency is achieved when labor is moving from unproductive activities to more productive ones, and new entrants to the labor force go into more productive activities rather than unproductive. And investment is directed to more productive uses. Now, the European Commission, through the Eurogroup, is paying a lot of attention to this currently. About a year ago, in fact, I was invited to talk about, at the Eurogroup, about allocative efficiency, and that's all they wanted to talk about, and the figures I'm going to show you come from that meeting, in fact. Now, they've given the conditions that make capital more productive, and those are structural reforms in product markets to increase competition, so remove monopolies, improvement in access to finance, reduction in the costs of firm entry and exit, all very reasonable things, and ones that every country should strive for. In addition, there are policies that improve the quality of governance, that's how your public sector is run, the efficiency of the public sector generally, that will reduce the costs of doing business, increase the returns to innovation. In other words, improve your business environment. Now, what about workers? Well, workers are the biggest resource, of course, and the policies that reduce adjustment costs faced by workers when responding to new technologies is what governments need to pay attention to. Now, they do that through upskilling and reskilling. I'm going to come back to those right at the end, in fact, those factors, through the better initial human capital acquisition, in other words, through improvements in the educational system, and by avoiding employment protection laws that stick workers to a job that they have no incentive to increase their productivity. They say, I've got my job now until retirement, why should I care? Whether public sector or private sector, that is not a good thing. And finally, public sector employment conditions, which mirror conditions in the private sector, because it's the private sector that drives growth, not the public sector. The public sector is there to serve the private sector. That's what you should always remember. And therefore, conditions in the public sector should never be better than the private sector. They should try and match them. Now, this is the record that in the European Union, this was constructed by the economists of the Eurogroup. What is measured in the vertical axis is the level of allocative efficiency in 2014. Below is the growth or the change in allocative efficiency between 2000 and 2014. I'm sure you recognize the country. The country with the worst performance is Cyprus in the European Union. Greece is not here, by the way, but just wait until you see the Greek figure, because they couldn't calculate the change in Greek allocative efficiency between 2000 and 2014. The big successes, which are on the top right, are the countries of the Central and Eastern Europe. They had the biggest improvement, and they have a good allocation of resources. The core group is somewhere in the middle, where you would expect it to be. In terms of level, the Nordics are obviously there. Denmark, Denmark, Austria, Germany are up there. Sweden is even above Germany, actually. Sorry, above Denmark. And then the European South, all the countries of the European South are in the worst quadrant, with Cyprus at the bottom. Next, Portugal, Spain, Belgium is there, Italy, and Finland, which is just outside. So what we have is not good. The change we've experienced since 2000 is not good. Now here is allocative efficiency measured against governance. Now governance here refers to the efficiency of the public sector. And you can see that there is a correlation that if you have an inefficient public sector, you are going to get poor allocation of resources in the country for the reasons I mentioned before. By far the worst performer here is Greece. Greece is here. It's that point there. It's got the lowest allocative efficiency, the most inefficient allocation of resources. Let me put it in more plain English. And it also has the worst public sector performance in the European Union. But then Cyprus has the, surprisingly, is not next actually in the performance of the public sector. It's better than Bulgaria, Romania, and Portugal. And Spain, I should say. I have no idea how they managed to measure that, but it's the European, it's a Eurogroup measurement. But again, as you can see, again, what you find in the top quadrant up there are the northern European countries. and then you gradually move to the south as you come down here. So in the evaluation of where we are, Greece has the lowest efficiency in the European Union by large margin. It's followed by Cyprus, Portugal, Romania, Bulgaria. But all countries of the European South are in the worst quadrant. Now, let's look at in more detail some of the indicators that go to make that. Why is that this inefficiency? Now, the quality of regulatory governance is one of the components of the worldwide governance indicators, and is correlated with allocative efficiency. In other words, if you have good regulation, you get a good allocation of resources. If you have poor, excessive regulation in your country, then you don't get a good allocation of resources. Now, Greece, again, is the worst performer in that, and Cyprus is, again, way down. This is related to what I showed you before, although I'm going to show you something else actually as well related to that. No, that's the governance I showed you before. This is the governance point I was showing you before. Now, is the situation likely to improve? Well, the World Economic Forum computes the Global Competitiveness Index 4.0, referring to new technologies, where they look at the set of institutions, policies, and factors in each country that determine the level of productivity to come. So if you have a good score on the Global Competitiveness Index, then you are likely to improve your productivity in the future. If you have a poor one, you are likely to get stuck where you are, if not get worse. And this is what they find. The red lines are Greece and Cyprus again. You can see the best performances of competitiveness: Netherlands, Switzerland, Germany, Sweden, UK, Denmark, Finland, France. On the right, the worst: Croatia, Turkey, Greece, Romania, Bulgaria, Hungary, and Cyprus. Obviously, this is not encouraging in terms of where the allocation of resources is going to go. One bit of further evidence that the World Bank Doing Business Index, again, if you score well on the Doing Business Index, then you are going to get new companies coming into your country, new technologically improved companies. This is what they take into account when they calculate that: starting business, resolving insolvency, enforcing contracts, paying taxes, trading across borders. Those are the factors that go into the World Bank Doing Business. And the picture you see here is very similar to the one I showed you before. Malta, actually, it is the worst European nation here, which surprised me a little bit, but there you are. And then it's Greece, Bulgaria, Croatia, Cyprus, Hungary again. And again, on the left, you have Denmark, Norway, UK, Sweden. In fact, they're not as highly correlated as I thought these two indices, but the country, in terms of country groups, they are highly correlated. So what verdict can we say about this way of achieving the convergence? Is that both Cyprus and Greece are amongst the poorer performers, that their economic resources are poorly allocated. We do have the resources, but we don't make good use of them. The main one being the human capital of the country. And the indications that I've shown you are that at present policies, the situation will not improve. We're more likely to regress than progress. Therefore, some change. We need big changes here. achieve this allocation. And I'll come back right at the end. Now, the other way of achieving convergence in economic growth, of course, the new technology, which was on my title. Now, there is the prospect that we'll do well in the new technology. The new technologies nowadays are digital. It's Industry 4.0, the fourth industrial revolution. They all seem to have number 4 in there. The number 1 was the waterways and the steam engine. Number 2 was electricity and the motor car, internal combustion engine. Number 3 was computers. Number 4 is artificial intelligence and robotics. Now, what about jobs? Well, there are fears that jobs will be taken over by the robots and there will be no work left to do. I believe all those claims are false. I'm convinced about that, in fact. Instead, what I think is that new technologies are bringing a transformation from jobs that can be programmed and given to the robots and to computers to jobs that involve human creativity and contact. When you say that, people tell you, well, computer now can write music, and in fact, a computer recently wrote, they fed him with all the music that Bach wrote and asked the computer to create a new piece. And various music experts couldn't recognize the machine-generated one from the human, but of course what you forget is that the machine could only do it by listening to Bach over and over again. Bach never listened to another Bach before him to produce the music. That's the difference. Now, robots, in fact, are mainly taking over jobs that are mechanical. Almost all robots in existence are in manufacturing. And the jobs that they take over are just boring. They are transportation jobs, the welding, assembling, and so on and so forth. In fact, from the fear that robots will take our jobs, one of the biggest users of robots, the employee, I saw some incredible numbers, something like 1 million, maybe it's Amazon. Amazon is one of the biggest robot users, and people started accusing them that they will stop buying Amazon because they are bad to their employees. There were some bad incidences in warehouses. So Amazon now in the UK at least is running a charm offensive by inviting schools to go and see what's happening and others. And I have a son, most of you probably know, who's at school, and his school was invited to the Amazon warehouse to see how robots work. So he came home and I said to him, well, how did you find the robots? And he said, oh, they were not robots. They were just little machines that moved around carrying boxes. There were no robots like with big arms carrying. So when people think of robots, that's what they think. But in fact, most robots in existence, the productive robots, that's basically what they are. If it's a transportation, it's just a platform that moves around on its own. So they're boring. Don't expect to go into a factory that uses robots and see the kind of Frankenstein-like creatures moving around. Now this is the usage of robots in the world. These are robots from this data from the International Federation of Robotics. I mean, the country that is the most robotized is the Republic of Korea, South Korea, and then Singapore, Germany, Japan. I mean, Europe, Germany is way, way ahead in robotics than any other country, followed by Sweden, actually, with European countries, and Denmark. But basically, what you see there, that the countries that the International Federation of Robotics thought of including are the Northern European countries. I mean, the only Southern European country, Italy must be there, and that's because of its motor industry. And of course, the way it did it was to avoid unions, because you know what Italian car manufacturing unions are like. Whereas if it was robots, don't go on strike. Now, Greek manufacturing is not there. They hardly employ any robots. But there are data. You could compile data for the economy as a whole. And you can see where Greece is, that little red dot at on the right. Cyprus is not there at all, by the way. I don't know if we have any robots in Cyprus, do we? The most, we could have in the tourist industry, actually. The most recent robot I've seen was in a hotel in China, where if you order something to your room that you didn't have, like a toothbrush or something, a robot brings it to you. It knows how to operate the elevator, which is quite advanced, and then stands outside your door and calls you and says in a very mechanical voice. Open your door, your toothbrush is here. He's called Robert. It's fascinating. In fact, I took a video of him. I have to tell you, that was a really fun incident. You know how sometimes in hotels the lift door is about to close, and then you run and you put your hand into opening it all. And when Robert was inside delivering some water to a room upstairs, two young men ran there, opened the door, and then they saw who was closing the door. And they saw a little robot this big. They jumped out again. Anyway, now you can see here the. I don't know. I guess here I only have the European Union countries. I removed the Asian countries, and you can see again that Germany is way ahead of us in terms of robotic use. Okay, let's now move to artificial intelligence, which is more difficult to understand and also potentially more important, actually. Now, what's the definition of artificial intelligence? The definition is that there are computers that make decisions. That's the key. Robots don't make decisions. You tell a robot, like the one I saw in the hotel, you know, there is a box, you open it, you put water in, you press some buttons, and goes and delivers. But with artificial intelligence, they make decisions. Now, there was a big change in the way scientists model artificial intelligence. The first generation of artificial intelligence, which was 1950s and 60s, 1958 was a critical year in artificial intelligence. It's the foundation of artificial intelligence at Dartmouth in the United States. That decisions were made, what they attempted to do was to replicate human thinking. So you feed the computer with masses of data, that's why big data is important, and then let it choose a course of action on the basis of past human performance. And that's the typical case of the Deep Blue that plays chess. They fed thousands and thousands of chess games, and then they instructed the computer who was the winner each time. And then they said to that computer, now play against a human and follow the principles that winners followed in the past, and succeeded to beat Kasparov. But it's only by knowing earlier movements. It copied. You know, when Kasparov was making a move, then the computer was thinking, in the past, is there any example of some human making that move and another human that beat him? And then it found examples from the many, many cases that it was fed, and that's how it managed to win. But the new generation of AI, which started sometime in the 1980s, because they completely failed, in fact, to replicate the human mind. There were some successes, like the Kasparov case, the Deep Blue. But in fact, artificial intelligence failed them. That's why it was no risk to work. Now, the new generation of AI, what they teach the machine now are the rules of the game. It's not how humans behaved in the past. And then the machines communicate between themselves to learn how to play or how to function on the basis of the rules that they teach them. And that's what's known as the Internet of Things. And that's why IoT is what you always hear about now, because it's a communication between machines. And it's scary in the sense that many fear that human beings might lose control, that the machines communicate between them to the extent that the human being the program that created that machine in the first instance doesn't know what the computers know anymore. Now, I believe in fact, there is a tendency now to move in that direction by many, is that there are important synergies between these beings and artificial intelligence. It was known Tech for Good. There's a very good McKinsey publication, in fact, on Tech for Good, how companies can use this new technology for the good of their labor force, but it obviously could be used for the bad of the labor force, to damage the labor force. Now, let me give you examples of what I mean by the rules of the game. The best contrast is the machine that is called AlphaGo, that beat all human opponents in Go. Now, Go is a more difficult game than chess. You cannot feed a machine with all the movements of Go. It's just an infinite number of them. So instead, what the computer was fed was the rules of Go, and then it was told to process those rules, and the one that wins is the one that anticipates more accurately where the future moves are going to come, and the computer managed it. So the AlphaGo was fundamentally different from the Deep Blue. The Deep Blue just knew what humans did in the past. The AlphaGo knew the rules of the game. Now, platooning, which is becoming very popular nowadays, and they're ready to apply it. In fact, the United States is about to apply it because because of some changes they made in the regulatory environment. Now, what platooning basically means is that they're going to apply it in deliveries, tractor deliveries. Essentially, what it does is that driverless cars that go together. Instead of having a train where you pull the machines, you have, you say, 10 trucks loaded with cars moving along. And what happens is that one of them is taught the rules of the game, how you drive, and then sends information to the ones behind. You know, it sends a message, stop here, there's a red light, you know, that kind of thing. Again, it depends entirely on the intelligence that's coming from knowing how to drive. And the big regulatory change in the United States, the game changer in the United States, is that the company that makes the autonomous vehicle is responsible for safety, whereas in Europe we still haven't formulated a safety policy. You know, if a driverless car kills someone on the road, who is responsible? If there is a driver in the car, then obviously, you know, a judge decides, is it the driver or is it the pedestrian? But if there is no driver, who is? Well, in the United States, they decided it's the manufacturer who is responsible. And I recently listened to a talk by the chairperson of the Tesla board, and she was saying that their accidents are so few that they're quite prepared to take on that risk. Sort of have the driverless cars on the road. And in fact, she goes to work on a driverless car, but she always sits in the car. She says she would never, she sits at the driver's seat. I said to her, you should take the challenge and sit at the back seat and see. She said, no, I'm too scared to do that yet. And then in agriculture and medicine and all that, especially in medicine, it's the rules of the game against the rules of good health and medication that machines are given. So that's where we are. Now, what's the penetration? Well, it's very difficult to measure penetration by AI because there is no frontier, basically. You don't know where you're going to go, and you cannot measure how many computers there are in a country in the way you measure robots. The way that the International Federation of Robotics measures them is by talking to producers, and it's asking, in which countries are you selling your robots? And then that's easy to measure. This is not, the best you can do with AI is to look at what's known as the enablers. Does the country have the infrastructure ready to adopt AI? You know, the example I gave you from the United States, for example, shows that the United States is ready to take on AI on the roads because they sorted out the safety issue. In Europe, we are not, because we haven't sorted out the safety issue yet. It's the digital infrastructure, it's the data availability, it's the trade personnel to program, it's the regulation. There are all those things. They're enablers. And there are people who calculated the enablers. One that I came across recently, and is quite good, I talked to the people, I sort of know what they did, in fact, in the background work, is the McKinsey Global Institute has calculated enablers. And they divided the countries that they looked at into 4 groups. The first one are the leaders, the undisputed leaders. The undisputed leaders are China and the United States. But the United States was way, way ahead. But in 2012, President Xi changed the policy in China and said, we're going to beat the United States. He was very reminiscent of John Kennedy, in fact, in the 1960s, when the Soviets first went to space and said, within 10 years, we're going to have a man on the moon. She said, within 10 years, we're going to have more papers in AI than the Americans, and they do have them. In fact, there are more citations to Chinese papers on AI than American. But they're the 2 big ones. I mean, size matters there. You know, they're big enough to do that. Now, you know, that you cannot compete with those. Let's look at the other countries. Now the leading group amongst smaller countries consists of practically the whole of Northern Europe, It also has Australia, South Korea, but it's Germany and the other Northern European countries. All the Scandinavians are there. And on per capita terms, these countries often surpass the two leaders. They have the infrastructure ready, and they're ready to take on AI when it becomes available. Now, then it's what they call the laggards, it's group 3. The laggards are the European countries, mainly Southern and Central and Eastern European. Some Asian countries like India, they need to do more to enhance their capabilities, but they have some capability. And then the fourth group is the one that doesn't have any capability yet. And the only countries that are North African that they include in that group are Greece and Bulgaria. Romania wasn't there, actually. I mean, always when you look at these statistics, the three countries go together, Greece, Bulgaria, Romania. Cyprus, of course, is not there, but I doubt whether it would be different from Greece. So what this is telling you is that if you look at how much infrastructure there is in place to accept artificial intelligence in the workplace, then Northern Europe is there, it's adopting it. Southern Europe, Italy, and the others need to do some more work, and Central and Eastern Europe. In fact, some countries like Estonia, for example, are already there, in fact, but some others are preparing. And the Baltics, Greece, Bulgaria, and the others are nowhere near ready. They have nothing, in fact. Now, Cyprus data, as I was saying, is unavailable, but I doubt whether it's better than Greek, but then, I hope I'm proved wrong. Now, that's one thing, the enablers. Another way of saying how ready are you to do AI, to bring on computers with AI, is to look how much R&D are doing, because R&D is the driver behind AI. And R&D will produce the enablers of the future. Now, this is the total R&D done as a percentage of GDP. Again, most of R&D, as percentage of R&D, is done by the Nordics again, Switzerland. Switzerland, actually, which is very high, is pharmaceuticals. Practically the whole of it is pharmaceuticals, which is the main R&D industry, in fact, now. But then there is Sweden, Austria, Germany, Denmark, Finland, Belgium, and all that. And then down way below, Cyprus. Greece is not doing too badly, actually, here compared with Cyprus. But it does belong to the Eastern group. Russia, Greece. Ireland is not doing R&D because the technology that Ireland is using comes from California. All the Irish companies are American. Apple and Google and all these companies. Now, more interesting is this one. I didn't know, Ambassador, you're going to be here. That's not why I put Sweden there. It's because it's the country I admire because of Spotify, Mr. Elk. Or is it Ek? How do you pronounce it? Ek. The founder, the owner of Ek, yeah, who refuses to sell to the Americans. He's the only one, in fact, in Europe who hasn't sold a successful app to the Americans. And now you can see again where the leading R&D nations are. South Korea, Sweden in Europe is the leading nation doing R&D, and Germany very close. And Greece and Cyprus way down. Now, what I find interesting here is the allocation between business, government, and universities. Now, in Greece, there is some R&D done by businesses. Now, government R&D is mainly for defense purposes. If I put Israel here, actually, which I would have put the red bar is far much bigger than what you see here, because they have they have a very successful R&D program that you do within your army service, that young people do out of university in the army. Now, if you look at Cyprus, which is extremely low, it's practically all done by universities. If you remove universities from Cyprus, in fact, there's basically no research done. I mean, the blue there, I think, is probably one pharmaceutical company that is doing R&D that the minister frequently mentions. Who have thought that we would be so successful in pharmaceutical R&D? It's the blue that you see there. So more work needs to be done there. So the verdict is that the robots and AI are coming. Northern Europe is doing well. Southern Europe is falling further behind, and Cyprus and Greece amongst the worst performers. Now, Now, before I talk briefly about how they can help, you can see now what connection I'm drawing, in that we have a European Union whose objective is convergence. Otherwise, we get the big inequalities, we get political extremism, dissatisfaction with European institutions. The only way to do it is by, and the reason we have the single market and the free trade agreements and the idea of the euro was that it would help in convergence, but there is a big gap that keeps opening up between the European South and especially Cyprus and Greece, and Malta actually falls in that category, and the North. Italy is a big problem because it's half of the South and it's not converging, but it's not, as you saw in the other statistics with AI and robotics, it's not as bad as the other European countries. Now, what can we do? Obviously, we cannot suddenly say, you know, we're going to buy all these world's computers and install them and have them run our hotels. We have to start step by step. And the most essential, in my view, is to improve the competitiveness of the country, improve the business environment. The European Union is very aware of that. They requested that we set up a competitiveness council, which we have. I don't know, I don't see any members that I recognize here from the competitiveness council, but I hope they do their work and come up with suggestions. I did list before what the Eurogroup says you can do to improve your locative efficiency. That's basically what they need to do. I mean, it's easy to put down on paper. How you work through the public sector here, I don't know. The second, and almost as important, is governance. Now, governance is the efficiency of the public sector. And it's related to competitiveness and the business environment. And obviously there we need to improve substantially. I mean, like, if you ask where should the public sector improve, it's, you don't know where to start and where you end actually with Cyprus public sector. In my view, actually, maybe a good start is the courts, is the time that the courts take to reach decisions. And generally, the time it takes to reach decisions. You know, like if you write a letter to the Inland Revenue about taxes, you get a reply in 7 years. I mean, it's ridiculous. I mean, who has incentive to comply? If you have a court case, if you want to sue your neighbor because he's stolen, because you cut down your trees or something, that's my personal experience, by the way. Then you don't do it because you have to wait for 6, 7 years for the case to be heard. You can grow new trees by that time. I think the time it takes to reach decisions is number one. And then to improve the way they deal with companies generally. You know, just be efficient. You know, digitize. You know, copy Estonia, for heaven's sakes. You know, why should Estonians be able to do that and not us? No, I mean, I'm not saying copy Singapore, which would be a lot more difficult, but so that's it. Then, when it comes to labor, education. Now, education is the main input from workers, and here we perform very badly. I didn't show you the PISA test because you have too many tables, but we are the worst performers in Europe in the PISA tests. Obviously, standards need to improve. But again, the main reason for failure here. Now, the PISA test is science, mathematics, and writing, composition, and where the worst performance is science and mathematics. Now, the main reason, of course, here is the failure of public sector schools, is the control that the public sector has on schools. Private schools are doing much better, and that's why every parent agonizes in case the English school doesn't accept their child, which is ridiculous, actually. It would be like that when I was going to school. I know it was a long time ago, but when I was growing up in Nicosia and going to school, only the failures were going to private schools. The successes were going to Pancyprian, to Elenion, Pancyprian Gymnasium, which is where I went. Now it's exactly the other way around. And if you ask why, you know, it's because of the way the public sector is running the schools. And now, it's not that we don't know how to do it. You know, if private schools can do it, why can't public schools do it? Just replicate their success, follow their example. No, we know better. Training then, and by the way, that's where I went, to state schools, Elenion and Pancyprian. Now, then formal education is not enough, of course, nowadays. You need lifelong learning. And I think the best results there come from the collaboration between companies and universities or government. You know, Silicon Valley is the ultimate example. I'm not saying create Silicon Valley, but at least follow their example. Collaborations between private companies and universities is extremely important. And collaborations between the state, the public sector, if you can get this act together, and companies and universities. And the biggest social challenge that we're facing is the transition of workers from jobs taken over by the robots to other jobs. And this process needs to be encouraged and supported by government and big companies, not destroy the robots because they're taking your job. Let them take the jobs. We can find other things to do. I can't imagine hoteliers, though, in Cyprus buying robots to deliver goods to rooms. I have to say one downside of that, actually, is that as soon as we discovered it, we kept calling for things to be delivered, for the robot to come up and deliver. But you know, the novelty, though, will wear off sooner or later. And how do you achieve those transitions? Well, government needs to provide a social safety net to avoid the disenfranchisement of workers on transition. It's very, very important that we do that. I like the idea of universal basic income, but obviously you cannot apply it without some modification. But we have the Scandinavians, the Danes, and the Swedes have very good models that they've been tried and tested. You know, the flexicurity principle. Government needs to support active training programs. Now, when people say, how can I support it? Well, again, follow best example. There's an amazingly good program in Singapore called Future Skills, where each person has a training account with the government, and they can spend it in any way they want in approved training programs, and it works very well. Just learn from best practice. You don't have to invent your own. We're so far behind that learning from best practice would be good enough to get there. And I've taken too long, but finally it's the conclusion that I mentioned many times, that unless we take really, really drastic action to reform the economy, we're going to fall further behind, and it's not good for the European Union as a whole. It's not good for our future in the European Union. We need to improve the allocation of resources. We're the worst performers along with Greece in Europe, and encourage new technology by creating the enablers, and start by improving competitiveness and improving the efficiency of the public sector. Otherwise, new technology will not come, including the education system and the length of time it takes for disputes to be resolved and all that. Otherwise, the benefits for digital technology, otherwise European North will just zoom ahead and we'll be left behind. And it's not good for our integration. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Sir Pissarides, for your excellent presentation and for your insightful and thoughtful comments on new technology. We have 2 minutes for questions. One question. Give us your name.
My name is Danai. If it's possible, I would like to ask in Greek, and you can translate. Βασικά ήθελα να ρωτήσω τι είναι η απόδειξη ότι τα ιδιωτικά σχολεία πιο πετυχημένα σε τούτον τον τομέα, επειδή από όσο γνωρίζω εγώ, όποιος είναι αποφύτος του Μετσόβιου και πάει μετά για μάστερ κάπου στην Αγγλία, το επίπεδο είναι αρκετά πιο ψηλό από τους αποφύτους των Αγγλικών Πανεπιστημίων και είναι κάτι που εφανερώ σε όλη τη διάρκεια του σχολικού έτους. Επίσης, γιατί αποτυχημένο κατά ανάγκη το δημόσιο σχολείο, αφού με τούτη την κυβέρνηση, από όσο γνωρίζω, δημιουργηθήκαν 9 σχολεία STEM, εξ ολοκλήρου, δηλαδή, όπως είναι τα αθλητικά και τα μουσικά σχολεία, και έγινε επιλεγόμενο το μάθημα ρομποτικής που στα ιδιωτικά, στα πλαίσια των ηλεκτρονικών υπολογιστών και όχι μόνο του μάθημα. Οπότε ήθελα να ρωτήσω τις αποδείξεις που έχετε ότι το δημόσιο σχολείο είναι καθαρά πιο αποτυχημένο. που το ιδιωτικό. Ευχαριστώ. Επίσης, φίλοι μου που είχαν θέση στο Μετσόβιο δεχτήκαν απευθείας προσφορά από το Oxford και Cambridge, επειδή απλά δέχτηκαν τους το Μετσόβιο στη δική τους τη σπουδή.
Okay, thanks a lot, Danai. To translate for our foreign guests, what Danai is saying that what evidence do we have that private schools here in Cyprus are better than the public schools? And she said, and she said that public schools are doing a very good job. They go to abroad, to Greece, especially, you know, the Polytechnic in Athens, and they're doing a great job. And also public schools here in Cyprus have as mandatory robotics. Okay, let me get another question before, you know, Sir Pissarίδis answers the questions. Second one, your name?
Good evening, I'm Andreas Dimitriou. Thank you for an interesting, Andreas Dimitriou. Thank you for an interesting talk. I would like to blend a bit the mentions that you did about an optimum currency area and the fact that Germany, for example, is paying more towards adopting new technologies and has adopted more new technologies compared to other EU members. It's often noticed in literature about the optimum currency area and about the Eurozone specifically that Germany, it's a net exporter, and thus it has a wonderful independence or semi-independence between growth and local consumption. And that's a luxury that other Eurozone members don't really have. And partly, you know, the capital available to finance investment into new technologies is diverted, is coming from outwards, first of all, and is diverted towards making sure that that export machine Germany has keeps working. And it seems that in Brussels, the idea is that...
Andreas, please give us a question.
The question is the current setup of the Eurozone sustainable, given that there are people that argue that this situation cannot really lead to an EU growth overall, because we have to feed the export machine.
Thanks a lot, Andreas. Thank you very much.
Now on the first question, well, first, how do we know that the performance of the private schools is better, or the performance of the public school is not good? And that's basically the international tests that are done, like the PISA test, for example. You know, it cannot be that we've been the worst, and in fact we deteriorated compared with the last two results on maths and all that, and yet we're good. Then the other reason that it's what the economist calls revealed preference, in the sense that it's very difficult to evaluate school performance by taking individual examples, to say that I know someone who went to university or that, because there are many things like, you know, from state schools in Cyprus, they might go to universities, but they do a lot of private lessons, much more than what they do in the private schools. Many at these universities in England, you might say England is biased because of the system that the private schools use here. They don't, as a rule, take state school students unless they do, unless they have some backup. You know, they've been doing other lessons and work. But as I was saying, that those are not. It's not easy just to come up with those immediately. You need to look at properly done surveys, or you observe the behavior of the people. You know, if these state schools are so successful and potentially more successful than the private, why are there so many more applications to private schools by parents? And why do they consider it a failure if they don't get in? Why did we have all those troubles between teachers and you know, arguing about things other than standards of education last year? and threatening again this year. I mean, those are indications of a system that is just not functioning.
And the second question?
The second question is whether the Eurozone is sustainable. Well, you see, there's a difference between sustainability and whether it does good to the countries that are members. I mean, unless you have a major crisis like the debt crisis we had in 2012, any currency value is sustainable. You know, we had fixed exchange rates for years and years, and they could go on until some crisis came and broke up the system. So the answer to whether it's sustainable or not ultimately depends on whether we're going to get another financial crisis, and essentially what the attitude of the European Central Bank, and especially Germany, is going to be to that crisis. Because the Germans might say, we've done too much to rescue you last time, and we're not going to rescue you this time. We're just going to follow, take 7, 8 countries that have converged within the Eurozone, Austria, Netherlands, Finland, those countries, and carry on as a Northern European currency. And if you want to come in, come. If you don't. That's a possibility, in which case it will make it sustainable. But it's certainly not a situation where you could say that there are such big benefits that countries will really strive to remain part of it if there is another crisis.
Okay,
if there isn't, then you might as well just carry on the way you are.
Thank you, Professor Pissarides. Mr. Saris.
You have shown us a remarkable advancement in technology, and we also feel it in our lives. And yet, the productivity numbers, even for the best performers, are relatively poor. And technology, of course, is available to everybody, not just to the Nordics. Anybody, for most of it, could adopt it. Robert Solow, some years back, remarked that technology is everywhere except in the productivity numbers. It was true then. It was surprising then. It is even more surprising now, especially since allocative efficiency, as you said, is bad, but it has not gotten worse. So why is it that we don't see more improvement in productivity numbers given a revolution, as you called it, a fourth industrial revolution?
Well, I'll
is there an
answer quickly.
Okay.
Well, first, it's still early days. The penetration, especially of AI, to the economy is still very, very small. Even like there are calculations that that in the financial sector, for example, within 10 years, we're going to be productivity will increase by something like 20%. That's what I've seen one only yesterday. In fact, an estimate like that, and they say 10% of that. 50% will be achieved in the first 5 years, and the rest later. So there is this issue that is coming. It's still too early. Now, robotics are only applied in manufacturing, basically. I said more than 90%, but in some countries, 99% manufacturing. And even within manufacturing, they are applied, it's basically 2 industries. It's the electronics industry and the vehicle transportation industry. And in those industries, productivities have gone up, but they're too small. Manufacturing even in Germany, manufacturing employs something like 15% of the labor force, but in countries like France, Britain, it only employs 10%. So despite the big increase, you don't see it in the economy as a whole, but you see the productivity difference. Then is the thing I mentioned about European characteristics, sort of paraphrasing the Chinese, that it's a measurement issue, essentially. That the way I measured it may not show up with all the benefits that the AI is bringing, in terms of the quality of service, for example. The Estonian public service, for example, is about you can do 90% of interactions with the public sectors. With the public service, you can do it online. It's digitalized. Here is practically zero. They are no more efficient than what we are. Maybe a little bit, but not much more. These things don't. But there's much better quality of service. You do it in the middle of the night, if you want. In Britain, actually, they have the same one. They've digitalized paying taxes, self-assessment. Last year, the Inland Revenue published statistics. When do people do their tax return? You won't believe which day it peaks in terms of people sitting to do their tax returns. New Year's Eve. I mean, the times people find convenient to do these things online, to deal with the public sector. It's just beyond intuition.
Okay, thank you. We have time for one more question. Stavros?
I want to ask the corruption question. I wonder if it's not important or it was not in the things you chose to cover. When you nicely linked productivity to better regulation, better governance, and R&D, I think it was brilliant how things were put together. But we know for kind of knowledge workers, knowledge economy, trust is the key. So if you have corruption, which is very high in our country, either perceived corruption or actual corruption, is it a big inhibitor? Like it's difficult to have better regulation and better governance because there is no trust in the society. You have the Auditor General running after every university professor asking, which conference did you go to? So do you think corruption is a big issue to make the machine work?
Trust actually is absolutely essential. Yes. I don't know, I should have mentioned it maybe. In fact, I probably had it in an earlier version, but it was too long. No, trust is absolutely essential especially in the financial sector, of course, but also in dealings with government, with the public sector. And that's where the connection with corruption comes along, in that if you don't trust the public sector, that you think they might be corrupt, you think there might be something that you cannot trust them to do the right thing, then you might be put off entirely, and if you're an international company, go and locate somewhere else. Now, now in Cyprus, the biggest corruption, so to speak, that comes up in surveys like the Eurobarometer, is that you can do your business much faster if you have political connections, which is a form of corruption. In fact, there we score something like, in their survey, something like 80% of business people say that yes, it helps to have political connections, party political connections to do your business. Well, the next one down, I think, is Greece with about 40%, something like that. And that's what might be stopping people improve competitiveness and efficiency, because you say that I can get things done faster if I go and join a political party, or if I sort of rub shoulders with a minister or an MP, and that will help more. I'm not saying it happens, but I'm saying it could happen.
Okay, thanks. So last question by Mr. Stavros Malas.
Thank you. You showed some figures claiming that growth is positively related to productivity, but yet in the case of Cyprus, productivity, in terms of productivity, we're doing very badly. But one might argue in terms of growth, we're growing fastest, I think it's the fastest economy growth in Europe. Is this a case of a serendipity type of an economic growth?
No, I think it's not real growth. It's a catch-up. It's a cyclical effect. It's the business cycle. It's because we have all these idle resources, like the high unemployment and the capital sitting there. One reason, which in a sense are unrelated to productivity. You know, like if you get a big dip and you have a free market economy, then you're going to come up, find your previous path. The growth I was talking about is the path, is the average level, is the average rate of growth, if you like, across business cycles. And there we're doing badly. There, a more telling statistic there is the one I showed you of what happens 10 years after the crisis, where we're still 9% below. And that 9% will be covered easily because it's essentially going back to your old ways. If we go back to our old ways, we're going to get 9% growth, so to speak, you know. And the other, I mean, the other thing that brings growth is the, which is not really productive growth, is the one that Greece was experiencing before, and Cyprus actually, before 2007, which is basically the construction sector. It's foreign money coming in to buy flats and houses. Shows up in the statistics as increasing GDP because the income of lawyers and accountants and developers, mention no names, goes up. And it shows up as an increase, but it's not productivity. You know, you're basically selling your biggest natural asset, which is your land. Serendipity, but negative serendipity.
Thank you, Mr. Pissarides. Based on your presentation and the discussion that we had in the questions,
I depressed you. Yeah.
I didn't say so. The question that may be raised is there light in the tunnel? Is there future for Cyprus and Greece? And also to respond to the question raised by one of our possibly students or young ladies, okay? Shall I put another way than there is room for improvement for the public schools. That's what I wanted to say. To put it another way, you understand what I mean? Okay? Anyway.
No, I should say, no, the thing about robotics actually and STEM is good. Now, where they're going to work, though, is a big question. I mean, the graduates that come out, they'll probably go abroad. But you need to train people for your own country.
Anyway, I would like to sincerely thank all of you for coming here tonight.
If there is light at the end of the tunnel?
Yes.
Well, in Greece, I mean, I don't want to put it here propaganda, but at least what the new prime minister said so far is moving in the right direction. Now, of course, you know, you have to wait and see whether it will be implemented. He just appointed me as head of a committee to recommend a program of growth, by the way.
Oh, great.
So I have to
thank you. So there is light in the tunnel then.
So I have to say there is light. I hope there is light. Here though, I have to say, with the exception of the Competitiveness Council, which you know, headed by Takis Kliridis, which is doing good work from what I've seen, I don't see any other initiatives that are moving in the right direction, I have to say. Although I didn't know about this robotic initiative actually in education, but.
Anyway, thank you. I would like to sincerely thank all of you for coming here tonight for this presentation. And I would like to sincerely thank Sir Christopher Pissarides for being always so kind. And he always says yes to our invitations. Thank you very much. Thank you.